Welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll with your host, Tiffany Scott. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Hidden History of Rock and Roll.
Hello and welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll. I'm your host, Tiffany Scott, and if you are new to my podcast, I do a deep dive into the behind-the-scenes stories of rock's greatest legends, how they came to be, how the records got played, and maybe some dirty little secrets, if we're lucky. This is your all-access backstage pass. Today, I have another industry legend on the show. He has been in the music industry for well over 50 years. He was working at places like RCA, Island Records, Charisma, Elektra, Geffen, Giant Records, and Curb Records with some amazing, iconic bands. Allow me to introduce the bands before I go ahead and introduce you. Sure. Jefferson Starship, Rick Springfield, Triumph, I hope I have enough air for all this, Hall & Oates, Dolly Parton, Elvis, U2, Melissa Etheridge, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Anthrax, Tom Waits, Robert Palmer, Tone Loc, and Young MC, Maxi Priest, Right Said Fred, Gary Moore, Brent Bourgeois, thank you, The Knack, Jellyfish, Metallica, 10,000 Maniacs, Fish, Silk, Nirvana, Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, Beck, Garbage, Lisa Loeb, Counting Crows, The Eagles, George Michael. One of my favorites is Disturbed. We're going to see that tour. Steely Dan and Owsley Stanley. Did I get that right? Mm-hmm. Curb, Tim McGraw, Leanne Rimes, Mercy Me, and Mercy Me for this resume, Winona Judd, and last but not least, a couple of indie projects that were famous, Michael Franti and Sixpence None the Richer. Welcome to the show, Bob Catania.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Yeah.
I really feel old.
Please.
And then I look at that list and it's just mind-blowing. And that's just kind of the surface.
Tip of the iceberg.
There was so many other artists that were fantastic artists that didn't have the level of success that a lot of these did. And but I remember something about every one of these projects. It's really amazing to be a guest here and be able to talk about the couple of things we're going to talk about, but to look at the breadth of everything that I've worked on over the years is pretty staggering.
Yeah, it seems to be the consensus among everybody that I've talked to is like, wow, I can't believe I worked with all these amazing artists. But when it comes down to writing a book or writing these stories down, it's very tedious and very difficult. And sometimes it's great to just have a talking book. And this podcast is what that's all about.
I know some of your previous guests, like the legendary John Scott, who I've known forever. Ooh. It's really great. Yeah, it's really great to talk to us veteran promotion guys because there's so many stories, and I don't have any dirty little secrets. I was a pretty mundane kind of guy in the business, but everyone who did what I did worked really hard on behalf of these artists. And it's great that you talk about the hidden history because the promotion guys were the people behind the scenes. There were some promotion guys that had bigger than life personalities who were as well known as some of the artists, or if not more so. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of us, we were just happy to be behind the scenes. These people are the stars. And it was really an honor and privilege to be able to help get their music exposed, however way, we did it. So, and I know we're going to talk about a couple specifics, but I'm looking at this going, wow, I could do 100 of these with you and talk about,
let's do that.
Of all of that. So
yeah, you have a large body of work. And a lot of people ask me when I post questions on Facebook or Instagram, who is your guest? And I said, you don't know them. That's the premise of the hidden history of rock and roll. These are the people that are behind the scenes that you don't know and have some incredible stories to share. And I call them the friends and family stories because we all talk about them, all the, industry, the insiders. We all just laugh and have these great conversations, but all the people, they don't know these stories. And I think it's a great way to bring them.
Right. One of my most enjoyable things is for about 15 years, I've been doing spin classes. I go 3 times a week. And one of my teachers there, her name is Linda, who's a great spin teacher and a great music person. And over the years, she'd be playing music and I'd go, I promoted that song.
Wow.
Like, what? And I go, I promoted that song. And after I had to explain to her, and then sometimes people in the class would go, are you a musician, a producer? I go, no, I just promoted that. And they don't really know what that means.
Exactly.
But it's really funny. I'll hear a song that I promoted in a spin class thinking, boy, 15, 20, 30 years ago, I never thought I'd be hearing that song
in a spin class.
In this context, So it's great to have, a lot of people hear a song and go, wow, that's a great memory.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of those songs, it's a great memory and a memory of what went into making that song a hit. So.
Yeah, that's and fantastic. And we want to get to know you, not only the artist and what happened behind the scenes, but I want to know a little bit about how you got started in the music industry and what your first job was.
Yeah, I got really lucky when I went to college. I went to Glassboro State College in southern New Jersey, and I went there thinking, I want to be a teacher. Seemed like a good thing to do. My first day in the dorm, I'm in my room, and this guy from across the hall walks in and goes, hey, welcome to the dorm. And for some bizarre reason, I just said to him, is there a college radio station here? And he goes, I'm the news director. Are you interested in being on the air?
Whoa.
And like a half hour later, I'm in the radio station reading news. And I ended up on the college radio station. All thoughts of being a teacher completely went away. And
what year was that?
I started college in 72.
Okay.
So, and I ended up being on, doing news. And then I became the music director and then the station manager. And I had an air shift. So I had this love of music. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a disc jockey. One of my roommates' high school friend worked at a record distributor in Philadelphia. It was in the worst part of Philadelphia. It was a dangerous neighborhood where you would normally have a warehouse, a huge warehouse. And it was Universal Record Distributors, nothing to do with Universal Music Group. And they distributed hundreds of small labels, and a lot of them weren't so small. They were A&M Records and United Artists. And one night at a campus party, my high school friend who worked there said, I'm so behind in all the mailings, I can't keep up with everything. I said, well, I have a pretty light class schedule. I was kind of ahead. I was still working at the station, and I got a part-time job working in the mailroom.
Oh, wow.
Which became a full-time job. It was probably making $100 a week, but I was inside of a record distributor, and I was getting free albums, and I was answering the phones, and I was mailing records and all of that. And I figured out in my young brain that this is a great networking opportunity and a great learning environment being in the mailroom. So I got to know everybody in the building, especially all the promotion people, and ended up being a gopher for a lot of them. And I would answer the phones and I'd talk to radio stations, and it was more of like, hey, we need, our 45 is scratched. Can you get us another copy of that 45? Or in Philadelphia itself, I get a call from WMMR. Hey, one of our albums is scratched. Can you run one over? So I would do that. I ended up meeting a lot of people there. And one day I found out that there was, it was probably about 7 or 8 months in, that RCA Records was looking for a local promotion person. And I was talking to one of the radio people that used to come and visit. And he said, hey kid, how are things going? I go, good. He goes, what's going on? I said, well, I hear there's this RCA job open, but I can't get an interview. He goes, you want that job? I said, well, I'd like to have an interview. And he put me on hold, and 5 minutes later he said, you have an interview next Wednesday, dress nicely and go to the interview. And I ended up being a local person in Philadelphia for RCA Records. And that was 1977. I joined, I think it was just a few weeks after Elvis Presley had died.
Oh, wow.
So it was quite
a week.
Quite a time at RCA Records. So I took the college radio experience, which led me to the distribution experience, working in the mailroom, into the local job, and then never looked back.
And then just to skip ahead, you had shared a really great story with me about how you feel about the music industry. And someone had talked to you at that time when you were in the mailroom and given his opinion. The Maddie Singer story.
So there was a legendary promotion guy there named Maddie the Humdinger Singer. All the promotion guys back in the generation or two before me all had nicknames. There was Maddie the Humdinger Singer. There was Billy the Hitmaker Harper. And they all had little round stickers that they would put on the 45s that they would send to the radio station. So it was a courtesy of Billy Hitmaker Harper.
Wow.
So, but I remember getting started, and Maddie, who was a total character, came up to me one day and said, kid, it's such a shame you missed the golden age of the music business. It's over. You missed it. And I remember I went home to my woman I was married to at the time, and I said, I can't believe it. I finally got in and I missed it, only to then have a 50-year career, going through, one would argue the greatest time in the music industry. And I always tell people who ask me about the music business today, and they go, well, it's not the same music business. I go, well, it's not. And it doesn't mean it's better or worse than what it used to be, because for the kid who's starting like I did now, their career is going to be the greatest time in the music industry for them. It's just going to be different. So, and I know you've talked to other people. It's the promotion that your dad did and I did and Steve Meyer and all those people. That's gone now, but it's something different, which is not bad. It's just different.
I think it's really a unique way to look at it.
Yeah,
for sure.
I just want to start with going to work for Island Records was unbelievable for me. As a teenager, I was collecting albums. I loved music in high school, college, college radio station. But for me, Island Records was always maybe the first label I became aware of as a label, and understanding that anything on that label is going to be of the greatest quality and probably my musical taste. And eventually there was labels like A&M and Chrysalis Records, that kind of Warner Brothers, they had that same feeling. But I grew up collecting Island Records. I had the little book of Island Records, and understood that a lot of the artists that were signed to Island Records in the UK ended up on US different labels through distribution deals. So you would go, well, Mott the Hooples on Atlantic Records, but they were really signed by Chris Blackwell at Island Records. And Cat Stevens was on A&M Records in the US, but he was an Island Records signing. So when I joined Island in 1984, Chris Blackwell, who owned the label, had decided even though he had a distribution deal with Warner's, he wanted to have more control over his artists and was going to bring in a staff of his own promotion people to make sure that those records didn't get lost in the shuffle. So I came over there in 1984. I had worked with Phil Corderero, the late, great Phil Corderero, at RCA Records, and he went to Island. And I called him up one day and I said, please take me, get me out of here. You know, there had been some things at RCA that didn't go my way, and it was time to move on. And Phil was gracious enough to bring me into Island as the head of rock promotion. So I'm in this most amazing place, and I get to talk to Chris Blackwell, which sometimes was a great thing and sometimes was a difficult thing, as any genius of that level is going to be. And it wasn't the first project that I started on there, but it was the first big one was U2. And I'll start this off by saying, when people ask me about my career and they go, what's the hardest project you ever worked? I go, that's easy. It's U2. And then everyone goes, don't be ridiculous. They're U2. I go, well, they're U2 now. When I got there, they weren't U2. And maybe we can kind of blend in that question at somebody talked about U2 being a college band, and was that intentional or whatever. So I wasn't around for the first few U2 albums. Those were all through Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers promotion promoted them. So that was Boy, War, October, Under a Blood Red Sky. So that I had nothing to do with those. And I know that the college radio was huge because college radio was very coordinated back then, and you had college radio charts, and they gravitated towards U2, which made a lot of sense. And I think the early success of U2 was really at what you would call either the modern rock or alternative stations, but in the early days, K-Rock in LA, WLIR on Long Island, kind of, they weren't the mainstream rock stations at the time, but they were the people that were looking for new artists and new music. So I knew there was a foundation there. And so when The Unforgettable Fire, which was the first album I worked, came in, we all gave it a listen, and it was really very different from some of the early U2 albums. It was much more melodic. It was a little bit more ethereal. It wasn't this hard edge driving alternative college rock thing. So I was like, okay, this is not what I thought it was going to be, but it was brilliant. It was just an amazing record. And I was very excited to start talking to rock radio about U2, and found out very quickly that there wasn't much of an appetite for U2. And I think a lot of it was, remember the conversations would always be something to the effect of Minneapolis or Des Moines or Savannah or something. It's like, what relevance does that band, some punk band from Dublin, what does that mean to our audience? And there's something valid about that. And again, their radio exposure was really kind of limited to that college and modern rock era. So we figured out pretty quickly we had our work cut out for us. This wasn't going to be like mailing the record in and all of a sudden, we were going to have a massive success. The thing with that album that really stood out was obviously Pride in the Name of Love. And that was the song that had a lot of energy. Other songs on the album, again, had a more sophisticated feel to them. But this was a pop song. So we focused in on that as the lead single and started to break down some barriers. I want to look at my... there was some concern at radio that it had a kind of a political bent to it. You know, it was about Martin Luther King and being assassinated. So it wasn't exactly a U2 love song, you know.
Right.
And like a lot of their music, it had a message to it. And sometimes that doesn't always go over well. But the songs seemed to resonate. We had that bass, college stations, you know, again, the LARs, the K-Rocks. And then the coasts kind of, you know, kind of came in on it, you know, the Northeast, you know, the LA, San Francisco. I should mention XRT in Chicago was always early on. So we suddenly had a foundation of some really good rock stations playing the song, and it was resonating. You know, it was, you know, blowing up the phones. It was selling. And the other thing with U2 is that management, Paul McGuinness and his team, they had done a great job of having the band on the road, building a foundation. It's like the old days of the business. You know, they played small clubs, they played medium clubs, then it was 3,000 seaters. And so as this record was developing, they were continuing to play. So a lot of times, you know, the conversation could be with a radio station and they would go, yeah, nobody cares about U2. Well, they just sold 15,000 tickets in your market, you know, in a half hour, you know, that kind of thing. I remember they played New York City. I think it was 2 nights at the Garden, 2 nights at the Meadowlands, and 1 night out on Long Island. And there was like 100,000 tickets available. And Scott Shannon, who was programming Z100 at the time, I think it was Z, called up Phil Q and goes, hey, who's this band that you have that just sold 100,000 tickets in my backyard in an afternoon? Well, you know, that kind of a thing. Right. So those are, you know, some of the stories that helped us, you know, develop this. I'm just looking at my notes here. Sorry.
Scott Shannon is great. And he just got back to me. He's going to do an episode. Right. Okay. And I'm super excited about it. But
just one of the all-time greats. So we ended up looking at my notes. We got that song to number 2 on the rock charts.
Oh, great.
Which was really incredible. I think, if memory serves, there was a 38 special song from a soundtrack called Teacher, Teacher. We couldn't dislodge that from number 1.
Oh, okay.
So we got to number 2, which sucks, but we built the foundation. What we did do at that point, and this was again back in the day, if you had a really big rock song, you would try to cross it over into top 40 to the more mainstream audience, you know, where they don't necessarily know U2 as the big touring band and things like that, but they like hit songs. So we started working that at Top 40 Radio, another, you know, long battle, because unlike rock radio, there was no foundation. You know, this was just there was no college top 40 stations, you know, per se, you know, that, and there were some that did play top 40, but nothing like, well, we're bringing you a foundation of this format. At alternative radio, it's just, here's a single, and it went to number 2 at rock radio. And looking at my notes, we ended up getting that song to number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100. And it's interesting when people say, well, U2 must have been so easy. You go see the band now and they play Pride in the Name of Love, and the place goes nuts. Everybody knows the song. Yeah. But back then, it was I think that was their first charting top 40 record, as well as a top 40 hit. So that's kind of how we got things really in place for U2. I will say one of the great things of working at Island Records, being a small independent label with Chris Blackwell as the owner, there was no corporate thing there. It wasn't like we had 25 albums being released. We had a lot of music that was very eclectic and different things that we wouldn't talk about here today. We had some top 40 things like the Tone Loc and Young MC. But I feel like we never stopped working U2, even between albums. It wasn't like, well, Unforgettable Fire album's over, time to, not talk about U2 for a while. We did have, I believe it was A Sort of Homecoming, was from Unforgettable Fire, and we had a lot of success with that at rock radio. I did one of my favorite tip sheet ads of all time was I went to my desk and I put a copy of the 12-inch of A Sort of Homecoming that we were going to work, a copy of their tour itinerary that said sold out, some other U2 kind of notes, and then a lot of little inside jokes about different radio people, a picture of my son who was like 2 years old at the time. There was a little inside joke about Phil Q, and I ran that as a tip sheet ad, and I may have given you that picture for and we had a lot of success with that song as well at rock radio. So we were continuing to build the foundation. The band continued to be on the road, and we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I think they did that Live Aid concert. I'm not sure if it was I think it might have been a Live Aid show where the Police were the headline and U2 was the act right before them. And that's when Bono would climb up the scaffolding and pick up the light and shine it on the office. And I remember watching U2's set, and then the Police came on afterwards, and they were great, don't get me wrong. But in my mind, I'm going, I think U2 has just become the best live band out there. So I'm not sure whose idea it was, but in the interim before the next studio album, we put out an EP, an extended play called Wide Awake in America, because the live shows were getting such a huge response. So it was kind of meant to be a fan record. Like here's some live tracks, low cost, price, and we'll keep U2 going. So and that was the genius of Chris and Island Records. It wasn't like, well, that record's over, we'll wait 3 years for the next one. It's like, okay, let's keep U2 in the forefront.
Keep the flow.
And I listened to there was a track called Bad, which was one of their big songs live. I think here it was from Live Aid, really, that was kind of their signature track. And it was like 8 or 9 minutes long. And it's funny. It doesn't really have a hook or a melody. It's kind of a vibe. And I remember talking to Paul McGuinness, the manager, and said, I'd like to release this to rock radio. I think this would do great. And I think the conversation, it's a long time ago, but it was kind of like, you do know the song doesn't have a hook or a melody or anything like that. And I go, there's just something about this song. And we released it to rock radio. And I remember Erin Riley was at MMR at the time, and this was a few weeks in, and she goes, this is our number one song, research, request. People can't get enough of this song. And it didn't burn out. It was just like, it had that vibe to it. And I always say, when I look at the U2, what really broke them, as big as Pride in the Name of Love was, I think Bad is the song, certainly at rock radio, that put them over the top. So,
and that's incredible that you had a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can, do the timeline myself and go back to when I was in high school. I graduated in '86, and I believe a group of friends of mine, we all piled into one of our cars and drove down to Long Beach to see U2. It was kind of, they were the headliners, and that's all we wanted to see was U2. And I think they played for several hours and just knocked us off our feet, and we were playing the album all the way there. And back in the day, you would listen on whatever it was. If it was K-Rock, they would play the album on your drive home.
Right.
And we just, lost our minds and had a great time.
So whoever's idea it was to have this little live EP, I look at it in a very outsized proportion to the success that, became the Joshua Tree. So just a quick aside, for many years, the last 10, 12 years, I was doing some work with a guy named Kosh. He's an art director. He did Abbey Road, Who's Next, Hotel California, but he worked for the Beatles. He worked at Apple Records. And he told me this story once about being called upstairs to the managing director's office. And they said, it was like 5 or 6 people, sit down, we're going to play you a test pressing of a record. And it was Abbey Road. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe that you got to do that. And I said, I really wish I had something like that in my career. And then I realized I did. So in 1987, Lou Malia, who was the president of Ireland at the time, and my favorite boss of all time, also gone way too soon, was just the greatest boss and allowed things to happen that might not have happened. By the way, I should mention the previous president, Charlie Prevost, who was there for Unforgettable Fire and Wide Awake in America. He was enormously responsible for, again, giving us the tools to make things happen. It wasn't the typical marketing meeting of, you didn't get enough ads this week. It was more like, we're building this thing. Just you guys are doing great. Just keep it going. So when Lou came in, we all got a call. Come to my office. I want to play you the new U2 album. So I look back in retrospect now because that was the Unforgettable Fire, and I'm going, that's my Abbey Road.
There you go.
I got to sit in the room with a handful of people. And Lou put on a test pressing of the Unforgettable Fire, and it was mind-blowing. And so the first song was With or Without You. And as you know, from being around promotion people, the one thing promotion people, if they're smart, never do is make a commitment of how they think a song will do at radio. Because you're never going to win that argument. I think that's a top 10 record. And then when it doesn't go top 10, well, Bob, you said it was. So I was always very careful about, my predictions of how a song would do. So With or Without You ends, and I jump up and I go, that's a #1 single. And then I went, oh, I probably shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
But it was a #1 single,
Well, my dad employed me at a very young age. He always gave me headphones, and I would listen to all the albums that he brought home. And then what he would start doing was he would bring a box home, hand it to me, and say, listen to all these albums and tell me which ones are your favorites. Because at the time, maybe I was, 12, 13, and so on, that was the audience. And so he got kind of another perspective, a different age perspective, which was me.
Right. So. My daughter, before she started working in advertising and now works for Disney, she was working at some radio stations as a sales assistant, and some program directors were like, is your dad Bob Catania? You know what I'm saying? And she'd go, yeah. And there was a couple of places where they would call her in with some other of the younger people and say, we want you to listen to some songs and see what you think, because they're more the target age than most of the programmers were.
Right.
So we did have With or Without You as a #1 record. We followed that up with I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, another #1 record, Where the Streets Have No Name, which was much more of a rock kind of, it really wasn't a top 40 song, but that ended up going to number 13. And at rock radio, it was insanity, because I think the first 2 tracks were #1. Everything was #1, top 5. We were releasing B-sides, and they were going crazy at rock radio. So
it made the transition
right
into that.
Yeah, they became, we look at the rock charts, and it's like, oh, there's 7 U2 singles on here. One thing I neglected to mention at the beginning, which I should have, is we had an amazing team at Island Records, just incredible team. I can't name everybody here. They know who they are, but this wouldn't have happened without my partner, Andy Allen. Mm-hmm. I was the head of promotion, and Andy had taken over for me as head of rock promotion. So all the promotion strategy, execution was me and Andy. Mm-hmm. And we had a really small staff. I mean, we didn't have 35 people. We had 7 or 8 people, mm-hmm. In the field, and we were competing against big labels. We did have some help from Atlantic Records, who were our distributor. So they definitely played a role in it. But, they had 25 other records to work. And mm-hmm. But if it wasn't for Andy, none of this would have happened. Mm-hmm. And I would say that over the course of a couple of years of the Joshua Tree album, the tour, because they were touring, huge behind this, was the most insane couple years of my life. It was just, we had the biggest record in the world at that point. I mean, it was obviously an international hit as well. And I used to say to Andy, we're never going to appreciate this now. It will be, when I'm talking to Tiffany Scott, in 2024, I can look back and go, wow, what did we unleash here? Right. I mean, it was just, insane. And, right. They were the biggest thing in the world, and we were this small little boutique label. And, I got to win a couple of Bobby Poe awards and Gavin awards because we had, because mm-hmm. we had the biggest, mm-hmm. record of the year. And I look back on 50 years and go, there's so many special records, but, that's one of these iconic records. And what's impressive about it is how it's all stood the test of time. Mm-hmm. And I want to get to that in a moment. I just wanted to also mention, just to wrap up my U2 Island. So I was around for the follow-up album, which was Rattle and Hum, which was an album, a tour, a movie, huge. All of that stuff. And it was Jimmy Iovine who produced it, I believe. And I was still in New York, and this crazy guy from LA would call me up, crack of dawn LA time. How's the record doing? How's the record doing? I'm going, it's that Jimmy Iovine again, And I didn't properly suck up to him as much as I should have at the time, had I known that he would go on to be Jimmy Iovine. I mean, he was already He was already Jimmy Iovine, but
you were being you.
But so we had that, and what's interesting is the first single from that was a song called Desire, mm-hmm. which was the beauty of U2 is they never really did anything twice. Mm-hmm. And so Desire comes out, and for Top 40 Radio, these are the With or Without You guys. And I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And here's this hard edge blues rock Desire song. And, we listened to it, and at first it was like, hell is this? And then you listen to it again and you go, oh my God, this is insane. And I had to look up the notes, and it was a #1 rock song.
Wow. And
it made it to #3 on the pop charts. Wow. So there was still so much U2 mania out there that even a very different kind of song. I was just thinking in my head, it's almost like when Fleetwood Mac had Tusk, mm-hmm. Which was mm-hmm. completely different than anything that they had done, but they were so big that the song broke through. And then I was looking at some notes. Angel of Harlem mm-hmm. came out after that. That was a #1 rock song. When Love Comes to Town was a #2 rock song. I think Desire was the only thing we really worked at Top 40. But again, rock radio was just mm-hmm. going insane. Mm-hmm. And again, I can kind of seg into one of your questions when someone asked about U2 playing the Sphere. Mm-hmm. And I think, if it's okay if I could expand
Absolutely.
on that.
I will get to it again, and right. we can kind of recap, but definitely.
But, going to see them, my wife and I went to see them. She's a massive U2 fan. And when I was thinking about when I did this story for my grandson, basically wrote this out for him and got to use it here as well. The most important project I ever worked on, U2 obviously makes sense from a musical standpoint, and the longevity. We were working this in 1984, and in 2023, I'm at the sold out Sphere, seeing U2 playing to old people like me, young people, and all so many of those songs that I promoted are still the mainstay of their show.
Big hits.
So anyway,
it must be nice, a nice feeling, a nice thing to think about. And while you were there, probably had a lot of emotions.
Yeah. When they did the Joshua Tree tour and they played the Rose Bowl, I think, yeah. I went to that. It was the anniversary show, and I think they did a few songs, to begin the show, and then they started playing With or Without You, and I just started crying. It just hit me because all of what we just talked about just flooded back in my mind. And again, there's the hundreds of nights on the road and, talking to radio stations and going to shows and
hard work.
Those nights in the hotels where you didn't know where you were and you're in a strange rental car and you're lost somewhere. And, that was our world with U2, especially during the Joshua Tree where it was just, insanity. So,
I mean, I can't imagine, doing that myself. I was young, but for me, and I know this show is not about me, but I can interject that when I was growing up and I knew what was going on with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, I watched them grow in America. And when one of the times I went to a concert with my parents and we sat there and it was probably the Forum, totally sold out, and we're sitting there and I just start bawling because I just was overwhelmed with emotion because I saw everything that my dad went through.
Right.
I was not on the road, I was not working with them, but I still felt it as a family member.
Right.
And you still know what that's like,
Well, I think of Tom Petty, which when I was a local guy in Philly, WIOQ was champion. It's funny, WIOQ, shout out to back when they were a rock station, they played Tom Petty so early that one day I was listening to their competitor, WMMR, and they said, and we got this new artist, Tom Petty. And I'm like, oh, does he have a second album out already? And, they had then gotten on board, as did YSP. So I'm sure your dad was like, okay, now we've got all of Philadelphia. But It was always those kind of early stations. And again, to U2, all credit to some of those, the XRTs and K-Rocks and LIRs that, probably NEW and MMR, stations that really jumped out and made a point to champion a band that most people didn't think really made sense for America.
If you are enjoying listening to Hidden History of Rock and Roll, please consider becoming a friend of the show on Patreon for only $5 a month. Your support will help deliver more excellent content. Plus, as a member, get your questions answered by the next legendary guest. Thanks for being the best part of the Hidden History of Rock and Roll.
So I want to go really quick to the question that came through this morning. It's a really fantastic question. And, we've kind of referenced it a little bit. Agora Hills.
Right. Beautiful town.
Howard.
Love it there.
I know you love it there. I don't know why. It's beautiful. Howard Schlossberg from Agora Hills, California. He is a Patreon member and a fan and a U2 fan. And he wants to know, U2 got their start almost entirely at college radio, as we've discussed, in the mid-'80s when commercial rock stations mostly rejected them as not fitting their format. No one could have predicted their success based on that start. He is curious as to whether the band and label management intentionally pursued college radio as a strategy of legitimately growing their base in the U.S., or if it just became a necessity when commercial.
I think, by the way, he's also probably my neighbor. So
Hi, Howard.
maybe I'll see him when I'm out walking Fiona one day. I think it was a necessity because if you know anything, and you do, about promoting radio, you can't just go out there and say, by the way, this is for you. This U2, you need to be playing them on your mainstream rock station in Des Moines or Houston or Albuquerque or whatever. So I think that it was a necessity to start with that. But by the way, that was not an unusual strategy. Even in all my promotion days at, before Island at RCA, we had a lot of, we had Eurythmics, Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, which kind of started at college radio and then crossed to rock radio and then crossed to top 40 radio. But they were kind of a cool modern, college radio band, so a lot of that was kind of a way of building a foundation, college radio. And then, like I mentioned, some of those stations like an XRT, an LIR, a K-Rock, that were known, to be more adventurous and finding things, especially from overseas. So again, it was a necessity, and it helped to build the foundation. And I think there's a lot of bands, I think like about REM, we're a huge college band that eventually, crossed over into the mainstream. So it was not a strategy. It kind of was a strategy. We can build a foundation here because college radio is going to be more receptive to a new band. Some of these, early leaning modern rock alternative stations are going to be more receptive. And in fairness to the commercial radio stations, their jobs, as you know, generate audience, play songs that that audience is going to be familiar with. So the college radio stations, those, forward-thinking rock stations that appealed to people who might be buying import records and reading Melody Maker and things to see what was going on in the UK, playing, I forgot about, WHTG in Asbury Park, which was right near where Andy and I lived, were huge champions of music like this. That's where Mike Marone came from and Rich Robinson. And, those guys were like a sounding board for us at Island Records especially. So they had an audience that had an expectation not to hear just the mainstream things. So our job was to make those artists more mainstream so that when the mainstream rock stations started playing it, their audience wasn't going to go, what the hell is this? We don't know about U2 or REM or Eurythmics or anything like that. So it was a good strategy.
Great strategy. And then we did also touch on the next question. Comes from Mark Glansman. He is one of my Patreon donors, and he lives in Cambria, California.
Okay, I've been there.
Well, we can say it two ways, Cambria or Cambria.
Right.
Don't know. He asks, U2 getting to perform as one of the first acts at the now famous Sphere, the fan base was stellar. How did it come to be that U2 was the force to lead the charge?
Well, I obviously, it's been a long time since I had any involvement. I know that it's with Azoff Management now. So Irving obviously has a lot of clout and relationships, but it makes sense to have them be the first act because they're an act, even though it's like, I think 18,000 people. That's a band that could play multiple shows. So I think what if you've been to the Sphere and it's not just like going to see a show because the bands also have to have a show that is the visual show to take advantage of what the Sphere offers. It's like IMAX on steroids. So you look for a band that has a fan base that's huge and over 40-year fan base, has a repertoire as deep as they have, creative band that you kind of know without. Well, you've seen their shows. They did that Zoo TV and a lot of their things. So there's you know that they're a creative band, that they're going to be able to pull off something that's going to match what the Sphere can offer. So I think when you look at it, band with that longevity, that fan base, if you're booking them, you can have them there for several months, because obviously they're only playing 2 or 3 nights a week. It's not like every single night. And they're going to put on an incredible visual show to match the musical show. It's funny. Some people said, did the visuals overwhelm the band? It's almost like the band wasn't there, right? I go, oh, no. There was a perfect balance of the visuals supported the music. I never once felt like, this could be anybody up there playing, but look at the pretty visuals going on. Every visual matched what the song was about, and that's the genius of that band. So they to me were really the perfect sort of band to open and certainly a credible band.
Oh yeah.
And it's like the Eagles are there now. That makes a lot of sense. I think Dead and Company makes a lot of sense. I would have loved to seen David Gilmour there. I just saw him at the Hollywood Bowl. I mean, that would be incredible. I just don't know if he's the kind of guy that wants to do 25 shows at
like a stay.
Yeah, he just kind of does his
thing. I was just going to ask you, and what you thought, or who would you like to see, since you've been there, and I have not.
Right.
Even though I was just in Vegas, we had a lot of other things we were doing. But who would you like to see there?
Well, the main one would be David Gilmour. That's the one that really comes to mind, because he just does a great visual show anyway, and the music. He's got music that has meaning as well. Like I also saw the ELO, which is the Over and Out tour, and that would have been cool. But those are a bunch of pop hits that work really well. But the Gilmour thing, you get into. I mean, I'm just imagine hearing "Comfortably Numb" in the Sphere,
right?
With lights and visuals and all would be unbelievable.
And we would put on our headphones and listen to that album.
Right, yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
And that was an intense experience, I can't imagine.
But by the way, I heard that they obviously filmed the U2 show.
Yes.
And my wife's niece and husband went to see U2 when they played. And then they were in Vegas recently and went to see the show. And they said, if you didn't know U2 wasn't there live, you would think they were there live. That's how impressive the filming was, and how the Sphere works.
Yeah, they did offer that. I don't know if they offered U2 when we were there, but I have seen that they do the movie experience as well.
We've seen that movie. It's pretty, the Planet Earth or something like that. It's pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. So tell us about like the final album that you worked with U2.
Right. So the last album I worked with was Rattle and Hum, which was the double album. And it was really a collection of some new material, some live material. It was also basically a soundtrack to the movie that they did. So it was a really big deal. And obviously coming off the success of the Joshua Tree, it was a massive success. And all credit to U2, because the easy thing to do would be the Joshua Tree Part 2. And they certainly didn't do that, which was really the mark of a brilliant band. They kept moving forward. And our first single was Desire, which was this, hard rockin', short to sweet to the point single. And certainly not With or Without You Part 3 or Where the Streets Have No Name. And the first time we heard it at the label, we all loved it. But I'm thinking, okay, if you're a top 40 program director, what are you going to be thinking? This is a real rock record. And I went and looked up on Wikipedia, and the song actually did very well at top 40. I think there was enough goodwill, and the band was so big and the movie was out there that it got played on Top 40. Of course, rock radio just went crazy for it. And that album, we just released rock hit after rock hit after rock hit. I mean, it was just one after the other. When Love Comes to Town, and so it was a tremendous project. So Rattle and Hum for me was kind of the end of my U2 cycle, because there was changes at the label, and basically my time with the label had come to an end. And I went to work for a startup label, Charisma Records, with my dear friend Phil Corderero. So I had a chance to help build a label, build a whole promotion department, and all of that. So that was very exciting. And Andy Allen, who was my partner at Island, he took my place running. Actually, he became the general manager of the label, and so he continued the U2 success story, which continued on with other albums. And eventually, they moved over to Interscope Records, and then Paul McGuinness, the manager, retired, and they had different management. So. When I think back on U2, I look at this really incredible process of The Unforgettable Fire, Wide Awake in America, Joshua Tree, and Rattle and Hum. And they all came pretty quickly. It wasn't like they went 5 years without a record. And I look at the body of work and the success that those albums had, and it's really, to this day, one of my proudest moments. And then to see them continue to have success, and we talked about, seeing the band at the Sphere. Here it is, 2024, and I started working them 1984, I think it was.
Wow.
So, and they're as viable as ever. I think there's clearly the fan base that grew up with them. But, looking around the Sphere that night, around the Sphere that night, there's a whole new audience of people. And now with the movie version of the show there, I think more and more people will continue to be exposed to them. I'm also married to like the biggest U2 fan in the world. Yeah. So when she hears one of the songs on the radio, I can go, well, your husband played a part in that. I was,
their legacy.
I was, I was a part of that. So that's kind of really how I wrap up U2, to say, because not every artist that you work has a career that lasts 30, 40 years. And with U2 and Melissa Etheridge, Melissa still very successful out there touring, but not at the level of U2, and not many people are, but it's still great to see that the people that you worked on, they're still out there, they're still making music, and still vital. And and with U2, you have to give it to them. They were one of the first the first band to go into the Sphere. And I saw some B-roll or something of them at the Sphere before the shows, looking at the arena, figuring out what kind of show they were going to have with the projections and the sound and all that. So here they are in 2024, still innovating, still being ahead of the curve, and being, vital, and still making some great new music as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was going to ask your opinion on their new music.
Oh, everything's great. They had a song about, it's called Atomic City, which is all about Las Vegas.
Oh, fun.
And the Sphere show, how they projected that, which was the city appeared inside the Sphere. Again, if you had fallen asleep and woken up, you'd go, how did I get on the Strip? How did, what happened here? But that was a new track that was just as dynamic as anything that they had done before. So
that's awesome.
It's great to see that, the work that I put in a long, long time ago is still paying dividends.
Has stood the test of time. Their music, they're just incredible. But I want to also ask you a little bit, because I'm going to be putting this out over the holidays. What was it like in the music industry back in, the holidays, spending the holidays in the industry?
Holidays were absolutely the best times because all of us who did promotion, and I'm sure everybody that you've interviewed, I know there's your dad and other Paul Rappaport and all these people. When you're doing radio promotion, it's the greatest job in the world. It's exciting and all that. But there's a lot of pressure that comes with it because you basically, I always say to people, you get a report card every week. How did the record do this week? Did you get ads? Did the rotations increase? Is there forward momentum? And it's not like you can go, well, we had 3 or 4 bad weeks, but don't worry about it. So there was a report card every week. In essence, there was a report card almost every day. And it was a 24/7 job. If U2 was in Des Moines on a Sunday night, you still had to make sure that everything, the radio people you were sending got there okay. If there was, whatever had to be done. So it didn't matter that, well, it's the weekend, not my problem.
Yeah.
So for 50 weeks, and I'm sure everyone who did promotion will tell you, it's 50 weeks and you get to the holiday and then, the holiday music, the stations start playing holiday music. And I think the program directors are as worn out as the promotion people promoting them. Everyone goes like, we need a break. We can't do this 52 weeks. And so everything really slowed down, and it was great because you could step back and take stock of the year. What were your successes? All the industry trade magazines and tip sheets had the year-end stats, so you could sit there and go, we were the number 1 rock label, or we were the number 1 pop label, or this was our market share for the year, and we broke this band or that band. So it was a time of reflection, a time to really sit back and slow down a little bit and maybe have dinners and things with staff that you didn't get to do. I will say, I'm just thinking about it. One of the things I was proud of at Island, being a small non-corporate label, it wasn't like we were working at the same speed, but there was a couple of projects that I launched over the holiday because there was, you knew the big labels were on break and everything had calmed down. So I'm like, this might be a good time to get some music to some program directors whose phone is not ringing 24 hours a day with, you got to add this, you got to add this. The band's coming to town. So, I remember there was a couple of pop records that we had at Island. We had a pop division. I think it was either Young MC or Tone Loc, but that's, we got that out there over the holiday season, and some guys were like, we can throw this record on and see what happens. And then you come back after January 1st and it's like, by the way, that Tone Loc song is top 10 requests on our station. And then off you go.
Wow.
And it was a great time in the industry because there was a lot of parties, a lot of the trade magazines had parties. There was a dance publication called SIN, Street Information Network, and the late, great Vince Pellegrino always had a big party in New York City, like the 2nd or 3rd week of December. And it was like, and it was especially great when I had moved out here to LA because it was like, man, I have to go to New York in December and see the tree and all the stores and, the whole vibe of New York City. And I had to go and put it on my expense account. So that was always that party particular. But, the labels usually had a holiday party, and sometimes the labels had, in the good old days, you got a Christmas bonus. Maybe you got a raise for the next year. And so it was really fantastic. And then there was a time when a lot of the artists, the management companies, sent Christmas gifts out. And I remember a lot of times in New York when I was on the train going back and forth in New York, I'd have 3 shopping bags full of stuff, you know, a bottle of champagne, something from the artist. So it was great. It was a great opportunity to sit back, recharge for a couple of weeks, maybe reintroduce yourself to your family where you had been away for so long. I'm sure you know, with your dad. Yeah. It's like, where is he? You know? So the holidays were really tremendous. So, and, you know, even at this point in my life, doing some assorted things still associated with the industry, it's kind of nice to know, like, okay, I can relax, you know, maybe prepare some things and be ready for the new year. So and I miss those days. Those were great days. Yeah,
those are some good days. And I'm just really excited that we're going to put out this U2 edition. We have another edition as well, second Bob Catania Part 2 that we're going to do. So this is going to be a great episode and so much fun. I love U2. I'm a huge U2 fan.
Thank you again for the opportunity to do this and tell those stories. And
yeah, it's fun.
I'm glad that you're archiving the hidden, like you said, the hidden history, because a lot of people don't know what the promotion, who's behind things. So to tell our stories, I think I speak on behalf of all the promotion people. We really appreciate this.
Yeah, and there's a lot, like we discussed before we jumped on the microphone, you know, there's a lot of stories that are going away, and we want to try and preserve as many as possible. And these stories are just really great, you know, for the fans to hear.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Tiffany.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me on Hidden History of Rock and Roll. You can find me on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and on Patreon. Become a friend of the show and get your questions answered by our next guest.
We hope you enjoyed the latest installment of the Hidden History of Rock and Roll. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on all the podcast platforms. Thanks for listening to the Hidden History of Rock and Roll with your host, Tiffany Scott.